Welcome to the Point of No Return podcast, a show at the intersection of technology and strategy. On this show, we interview industry leaders and experts to better understand how they think about strategy during this time of exponential progress.
Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of the Point of No Return podcast. On today's show, I spoke with Bethany Deshpande, founder and CEO at Soma Detect. Bethany and I had a great conversation, which I really enjoyed. And Bethany is one of these rare individuals that's highly motivated, a big picture thinker, but also is deeply passionate about her startup and really cares about the industry as a whole and is not just in it for financial gain. And it's in a sector which I know not that much about, which is agriculture. A little bit about her background. Bethany started off as an academic, having done research in subarctic permafrost environments. She also likes singing and adores chocolate. Bethany was a Schmelk Canada Fellow and won the Leadership and Sustainability Scholarship and the Student Services Award for Leadership Excellence. She completed her PhD in biology at the Université de Laval, where she studied microbial activity in northern ecosystems and gained experience using sensor technology in remote extreme environments, which really comes in handy for her startup, which we spoke about. We talked about how she moved from the world of academia to a tech startup, where she learned and how much she learned about sensor technology, the process of accidental innovation, which I found quite interesting, Soma Detect's mission to help dairy farmers, and her plan to scale the Team Scaler company. Bethany exudes passion about her work. She's working in an exciting new field that is really ripe with new possibilities, and I think that you'll enjoy the conversation. Bethany, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really happy that Antoine introduced us, and I had a chance to learn and discover more about Soma Detect, your company, and your background as well. I guess my first question, having looked at and understood a little bit your bio, is why did you leave the world of academia?
You know, I had been involved in some really exciting research work, and I was really privileged throughout my PhD work to get to see some incredible things, do some amazing work. But at the end of the day, academia, there's a few reasons why I chose sort of not to move forward with it. Part of that being that I wanted to explore other things. I wanted to get a sense of what was happening in the business world or in other fields. And I had felt like I had gained so many things in academia that would help me to do really incredible things elsewhere. And so I decided not to continue.
Okay, great. If you don't mind me asking, what was your PhD on?
So my PhD, I studied permafrost thaw lakes in subarctic Quebec. And I was looking at oxygen dynamics and bacteria in those lakes.
Oh, interesting. And what was I kind of geek out on these things, having done a thesis as well. Like, what was the main conclusion of your thesis?
The big thing I had realized and seen during my studies was actually how little oxygen goes into these lakes. So you'll have systems they're basically big puddles. You know, you'll have lakes that are 1 meter or 2 meters deep that spend much of the year in an anoxic state. And so they're producing actually even more methane than we had anticipated, because when there's no oxygen, instead of CO2 being produced through respiration, you have methane. And so, you know, we knew that they spent some of the year in an anoxic state, but I don't think anyone was really prepared for how much of the year they spend completely anoxic. And so that was a little bit, you know, it's a scary thing to realize, but it was also, I got to use a lot of sensor technology, a lot of the, you know, when you do a PhD, you're really using cutting edge technology. And that was really a cool part of my studies.
Okay, so you had to basically learn, okay, how do sensors work? How can I map this out in a real? You did primary research for this then.
Yeah, it's fundamental research. So I didn't create any of the sensors. I wasn't building them, but I was absolutely making decisions on what types of sensors we wanted to use, what was the most useful for, given the research questions that we wanted to answer, and then placement, where do you put these sensors, what lakes, and where in those lakes as well. So yeah, lots of really interesting things. And when you do Arctic research or subarctic research, the area that you're studying is a harsh environment. It spends much of the year frozen. In our case, there was a lot of pretty high salinity, so lots of salt in these lakes, given that they were freshwater, and all of these things. And so I was leaving sensors in them. I'd go in the summer, I'd install sensors, and then I would leave and just pray basically from September until next August that they stayed functioning, that they had enough power, that nothing leaked, and so forth. So it was a little bit of I felt like a cowboy of the Arctic, in that sense, but lots of cool stuff that we were able to realize, able to discover, and able to demonstrate as a result of those sensors and some of the work I got to do.
That's interesting. And did your work with sensors, obviously it was in a different context, but did your work and understanding of them then lead you to say, okay, what else can I do with this kind of technology? Or was it a different path to kind of led to your insight for Soma Detect?
I think that the major thing I learned from that research and from understanding science and the mass amount of data that I had collected, I realized, first of all, how quickly and easily we could collect lots of information, lots of data, and how important that could be. But I also was able to see the challenge of, okay, now you have all these numbers, you have these data tables, what do you do with them? And understanding the importance of translating things from raw data to meaningful results. And I think that's true in any field. I think that's a big thing we see, for anyone measuring data. Okay, you have the information and that's great. Now what are you going to do with it? And how do you get, the most value out of what you've been able to collect?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's a great point because data by itself is not going to give you much, right? It's really what you do with it and what's the value that someone can obtain out of it.
Exactly.
And I want to dive into Soma Detect, but before I want to just maybe one last question in terms of like what led you to it. And I saw that you had obviously a pretty distinguished academic career. Did anything in your education prepare you for the entrepreneurial path that you chose? And was it something that you predetermined in advance that, okay, once I'm done my PhD, I'm going to use this as a stepping stone? Or was it more opportunistic?
It was a little bit of everything. I think that, in my academic career and throughout school, I had always been involved in a lot of entrepreneurial activities or entrepreneurial things. So, and I mean, some of those we were talking about Startup Weekend, where, I had gotten the chance to organize one or be on the organizing team in Quebec City, and involved in the startup community in that way. I worked for about 10 years doing web design and development and got to work with a whole bunch of different, you work with small, medium-sized businesses. I had worked on a couple of academic projects, and then I had worked on some pretty big startups. And that was a really neat viewpoint and perspective I got into the land of startups. I got to see, managing from a business perspective, you have the business leadership and you're managing technical skill. I sort of saw the challenge that existed there, which I don't think I had appreciated before, and has certainly informed how we, set up structures and how we do, management activities at Soma Detect. And I think also, a lot of it was sort of understanding, I think the power of creating things. So in your PhD, you're really creating knowledge. Like you are collecting information, you are analyzing that, and you are trying to put something out in the world to help people understand, things in a new way. And in my case, that was permafrost thaw lakes. But that activity of getting to see creation, I think is really such an incredible thing, something I loved. And I think And that's really what drew me partially to entrepreneurship as well, was that opportunity to create just in a slightly different context.
Yeah, that's a great story. I love how you took an insight from your PhD in terms of like, well, this can be used to create something in the world rather than purely say how one thing is happening. So like from a pure observation point of view, but to an actual creation point of view, that led you to then say, okay, well, I want to create more. I found that pretty exciting. So that's very cool. And then, so what led you to the insight to the creation for Soma Detect? Was dairy farming something of a particular interest, or you saw the opportunity with sensor technology and you then chose the field that was the most ripe for value to be created?
So Soma Detect, I always say we have the funniest startup story. I didn't come from dairy. I didn't know anything actually about dairy farming when we began. This company really came about through my dad. My dad is an inventor. He's a biophysicist by training, and he's been working on sensor technologies for my entire life. So I had grown up watching him, make things, mostly in our basement and experiment and all this stuff. And right at the end of my PhD, he had a patent go through for the detection of somatic cells in raw milk. And it was through conversation with him, and I knew I was involved in the entrepreneurial community. I was living in Fredericton, New Brunswick at the time, where there's a lot of activity around startups and encouragement for startups. And I had, started talking to my dad about maybe wanting to commercialize something and take that next step beyond patenting and see what was possible. And my dad's reaction was kind of just like, well, you do it. Like you have free time now. You're done your studies and might as well, So he was so, generous and kind in letting me take leadership of this and letting me use his invention. But it wasn't my idea from the start. It was really my dad and my dad. It was through an accidental invention of my dad's, actually. He sort of discovered the dairy application by accident. And so, Soma Detect is in so many ways these serendipitous events that have come together really at the right time that allow us to do some incredible things in our company.
It feels like you said, this accidental innovation or accidental invention, but at the same time, you have to position yourself to be in that spot, to be able to detect, this key trend.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think all that we do in terms of artificial intelligence and computer vision, that was something, so 3 co-founders, myself, Nicholas Claremont, and Barath Suderson, came together. And Barath is really the brains behind artificial intelligence and deep learning in our company. And he was able to see the opportunity in that way, even when I didn't, I barely knew anything about artificial intelligence at that time. And so I think there's like the right people coming together. A lot of what we do in terms of AI and deep learning was not possible even 5 years ago or even 3 years ago, just because of where the technology was. Yeah. And then the industry also today is at a time where people want this information, not only farmers, but throughout the sort of dairy supply chain and even some consumers. We care about where our food comes from. We care about what we're putting in our bodies and what we're feeding to our children now, I think even more than ever before. And so that's all coming together for just this big data demand that Soma Detect is able to fill.
Yeah, I think it's a very good segue to maybe explain to the audience Soma Detect in greater detail and how your technology operates.
Absolutely. Cool. So we are a sensor and software company. We sort of say our core focus is on milk quality and dairy data. And we have an inline sensor system that fits on, it's a retrofit into existing dairy equipment, into milking equipment. And it enables farmers to know every critical compound of interest from their milk in real time. So, and one of the big benefits is there's no chemicals or reagents. And so basically we flow all of the milk through our sensor, and we're able, through analysis, using deep learning algorithms and using computer vision, provide really key metrics, things like fat and protein content, which are used to pay farmers. And somatic cells, as I mentioned, which are indicators of disease in dairy cows and so forth. So we provide that data, and we provide it from individual cows. And so they can know so much about the health of their animal, about the production of that animal, and really key things right on the farm.
Yeah, and it seems like a very avant-garde model, just because it feels like dairy farmers today are operating mostly without any data. In a sense, it's very visual or very ad hoc in terms of measurement, and your sensors are able to really deep dive and understand exactly what's happening in the quality of the milk, do prevention, and really demonstrate value for a farmer that never had access to this kind of information before.
Yeah, and I would say I think dairies are not without information or without data. Like each dairy operation is its own business, right? Each farm is a business, really. And so a farmer has lots of data, that they have access to. They know, they know their profit margin. They know the health of their cows. They know the age of the cows. They know how much milk they're producing and all of these things. What has been a challenge in the past is getting really, very regular data. So we always say we measure these key things from every cow at every milking, which is a ton more than they've ever been able to get before. And so it's about I think the other thing we do well is that the things that we're measuring are very directly, what they want to know about. Like, so fat and protein are used directly to calculate the payment. Whereas in the past they might get, they'll have a sense of the activity of the cow, or they'll have other indicators, maybe milk volume, but not necessarily, the sort of, that absolute data or the actual data that they need. And so, it's a pretty neat thing. And a lot of it's great because I think a lot of folks think of dairy farmers and agriculture in general as like, they imagine the old world and people driving around on tractors and I think milking cows by hand and all this stuff. But dairy farms are full of, pretty cutting edge equipment, and dairy farmers are constantly demanding, what they need, whether that be through information or through equipment, to do their job better, to have really well, watched herds to produce really good milk. And so, we see ourselves, we're helping them do that.
It's interesting. Yeah. And it feels like you're providing another layer of insight for them that would be extremely beneficial, given that they're already used to working with technology. And what I understand from the tech you guys are using, it's based on computer vision and neural networks. If you could describe it a little bit, maybe in greater detail, on how exactly you're capturing this information and relaying it back to the dairy farmers in a way that's value additive.
Absolutely. So so the sensor system that we use is optical. It's a light scattering device. And so we're shining light through milk and we capture the scatter pattern on the other side. And we're capturing that through photos. So we're taking pictures of light going through milk. And then that's where the computer vision and machine learning come into play. So we then analyze on the cloud those images for, somatic cell counts, fat, protein, and it's relaying what we see in the image to values. And that's really what is valuable for farmers, and what farmers want to know about is not just, of course, not a raw data of scatter pattern going through milk, but really those final values that we're able to pull out as a result of that analysis.
That's interesting. And then you're then relaying that information back, I imagine, through a mobile app. Is that correct?
Yep. So we have it's a piece of software. It can be viewed on computers or through the phone. And farmers can essentially see, either right after the milking or even during the milking, they can see these, the changes or the different concentrations of various compounds, and they can set alerts. So, not everyone needs to look at every piece of data all of the time. But maybe you want to know when you have a sick cow, or you want to know if a cow goes to an extreme, very low production or very high production. And with Soma Detect, they can actually set those values themselves. They can set the alert levels and get information on their herd based on what they're trying to optimize and what they're trying to improve.
And then how does your business model work? How do you then extract value from the dairy farmers?
So we sell sensors to farmers. So it's an equipment sale, like a hardware sale, as well as a SaaS model. So we charge between $2 and $5 per cow per month for the data and analytics behind what we
That's
do.
very interesting. Okay, so it's a mixture of you have to buy the equipment and then imagine maintenance, replacement of the equipment, but then it's on a per animal basis then. Okay.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
is there like a degrading model where it's like if it's a large farm, it works out to be a lower rate for if a certain dairy farmer has many cows?
Yeah. So absolutely. So I mean, the costs on our end certainly scale. Like the larger the herd, the more data we're sending. But typically, a large herd will not necessarily give you $5 per cow per month for that information, and they're used to getting sort of bulk discounts. So we will negotiate that price a little bit for, particularly large herds mostly in the U.S.
Okay, very cool. So I imagine, where are you right now in terms of your commercialization? You mentioned the U.S. Is that predominantly where your customers are?
Yeah, we absolutely have a customer base in Canada. So we started in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and New Brunswick has itself about 200 dairies. And we have about 12,000 across Canada and across Canada overall. But if you look in the U.S., there's about 40,000 to 50,000 dairies in the United States. And so we operate right now out of Fredericton, New Brunswick and Buffalo, New York, where we've set up our first U.S. base of operations. And New York State has about 5,000 farms directly within it of a really wide range of sizes. So you'll find farms with 40 or 50 cows all the way up to 3,000 or 4,000. And so it's been great. We've gotten to work with a huge diversity of farms on both sides of the border and get to know lots of incredible farmers that
That's
way.
great. And how do you look at your total addressable market? Is it all dairy farms in the world? Is that like the kind of like if you had to put together an investment deck, is that the kind of the way you calculate your TAM?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to communicate too. So we're really focused on commercialization in North America first, and doing a really good job sort of here in our own backyard. So we have that level of TAM, and then we also, of course, there is a global TAM. We have about over 20 million milking stalls, so potential sensor sales, as well as about 280 million dairy cows globally. And dairy is huge. It's an interesting industry because I think it's something that we don't always think about that much, and certainly not, most investors, dairy farming is not at the forefront of their mind or something that they see very frequently. Yeah, so there's a lot of education we do there. But dairy is huge. It's 10% of the world's protein. It's a $500 billion commodity on the global market. Most of us consume dairy each and every day. So, whether it be milk or cream and coffee or lattes, to butter, yogurt, cheese. These are really important foods in our food groups. They're really important parts of our diet. And dairy is such a lovely, it's a lovely food. It's a lovely source of protein and a really sustainable way to get nutrition into people, whether they be in Canada and the US where we have a developed nation. But, as you see countries developing, typically the dairy industry grows in those places as people demand higher and higher quality food. And I think that, when that's happening, when we see these changes, providing high quality milk to those populations is just so important. And, when we talk about world hunger, we talk a lot about the growth of the population over the next, 10 to 20 years. Providing food to our population and providing high quality food, I think is going to be really important and something that I'm just completely privileged and excited to be a part of.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you're definitely doing, I'll say God's work, but yeah, like humans' work in the sense of helping people with their nutrition. And I imagine dairy is probably a very stable and profitable market overall. Are there any markets where dairy is actually growing right now?
Oh, absolutely. It's growing. So if you look at South America, countries like Argentina, Brazil, dairy is just increasing enormously. In China, you have a population that previously did not consume any dairy product, right? They're not dairy farmers historically. And now folks in China, they want to be eating cheese. They want access to, sour cream and all of these really lovely foods that they associate as, parts of American tradition or, American nutrition. And so we see that as well, just exploding in size. And it's really incredible to see. And then, of course, we have places like India where traditionally, and I mean, still today, I don't want to sort of understate this, but in a lot of places in India, a family will own 1 or 2 cows, and that provides milk for, their family, likely their extended family and possibly others, neighbors that live nearby. And now even in those places, we have some consolidation of farming, and the whole dairy system is becoming sort of more formal. There's pretty stringent regulatory requirements, right? So we don't want low quality or contaminated milk going into our dairy supply. We want really high quality milk that we know we can make good cheese from and good yogurt and good butter. And so all of that is sort of taking shape more and more, that's had a really big influence on Soma Detect and how we've designed our business.
And do you find that there's potential applications outside of dairy with your technology? I feel like so many different parts of the agricultural value chain can use this type of insights and types of sensor technology. Do you find it's applicable elsewhere, or you just want to stay focused in this segment?
No, so there's absolutely application elsewhere. So, firstly, throughout the dairy value chain. So we have dairy farmers, and we're really focused and committed to making something incredible for dairy farmers first. But there's no doubt that, on every farm, a truck will come every day and pick up their milk, and they bring that to a processing facility and so on and so forth. So there's lots of opportunity throughout that sort of dairy system, the dairy transportation system, for other sensor technology and to really help connect not just the farmers, but processors and purchasers with knowledge about what they're buying and the quality of the milk. The other thing is that Soma Detect, like I said, the light scattering sensor technology was mainly developed for applications outside of dairy. So my dad's passion is really human health and, diagnostics of human health in low resource settings. So he was working a lot on applications for HIV detection, malaria diagnostic. He has some other projects as well. And so we know this technology can do a lot more than milk, and we certainly have our eye on those in the future.
That's great. Super interesting. Yeah, I'd love to touch base again in a few months or years and see how much you've grown in that regard, because I imagine there's a bunch of opportunities, and you'll need to have like a decision grid as to what you go after next. And the reason you use also, I think you also just announced a recent partnership, a capital infusion as well. How do you plan to invest your resources right now? Is it in product, in business development, in human capital? I was just curious to understand your current priorities.
Yeah, so it's a combination of people. So our team today is 15. We've grown a lot. We were 6 at the end of 2017, and we've now more than doubled midway through this year. So staffing is, of course, a big part. And, we work at Soma Detect. We have this team of incredible, both on the product development side, so engineers, programmers, lots of folks committed to making an incredibly solid, flawless product, as well as business and operations. So, hiring in the talent to really help us actually, when you talk about, there's big decisions to be made about how we go to market, partnerships that we develop and so forth. And it's just incredibly wonderful to have people help weigh in on this and help us make those decisions as we grow. So people is a big part. And then, of course, sort of manufacturing, product development, R&D, working through those stages. We're making 500 sensors this year. It's our first time doing a sort of larger batch of production. And it just takes money to make things. And so that's been the other big reason for financing.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine that it's one of these things, given any SaaS model, it definitely merits itself to capital and infusion because of the long term growth, right? I would almost be more bullish at this point, just because dairy farming, if you prove the value to the farmer, well, it's an infinite like customer lifetime value, right? It'll just keep present, right? Because it's not like dairy farmers are going anywhere anytime soon.
No, certainly not. Exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I won't get too much into the weeds in terms of capital, but this, I guess, then poses growth and scaling issues for you right now. In terms of maybe understanding the benefit for dairy farmers, how do they look at your product and then ascribe a financial value to it? Are they able to save, let's say, in terms of their costs, because they're able to catch they're able to have a higher quality milk, so they're able to preserve it better, so thus they gain more money or save on costs? Just curious to understand how the benefit for dairy farmers.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a huge combination. It's both cost saving and increased revenue. So we're really impacting both sides of that profit equation. In terms of cost saving, it's basically better by managing disease better. So we diagnose 2 of the top 5 diseases in the dairy industry. By managing disease and really, controlling how you treat, having better insight into what's happening in the herd, this cuts down on the cost of some of the diseases for the dairy farm. The other big thing we're able to do is help optimize reproduction. So being able to know precisely when a cow is in heat, when a cow is pregnant, all of these things are really critical because, of course, dairy farming, I always say it's such a mother focused activity. On a dairy farm, every cow is a woman and they're all mothers, and you need to reproduce, you need to have a baby in order to produce milk. And so that reproduction, managing that is a really big part of dairy farming, and a huge thing that farmers are always looking for help with. And on the increased profitability side, we can help really optimize the quality of the milk going forward. So if sometimes today it can be days that you're milking a cow with lower quality milk, that could be used elsewhere. There's so many other things that a farmer can do with that milk, like feeding it to calves or to other animals on the farm. And typically they would way rather know that in advance. And so we can tell them in real time if they're milking a cow with slightly lower quality, so that they can sort of manage it from there. And that just helps increase the quality of the milk going into the bulk tank, and therefore improving profitability for them. So it's all sides of the equation. It's really optimizing everything about a dairy farm to increase profitability and animal welfare. And, the happy cows, well-tended cows make great milk, and everybody knows that, right? Like whether you believe in dairy farming, whether you consume milk, whether you are a farmer, whether you are a consultant or a vet in this industry, folks know that happy, healthy cows make great milk, and that's a big part of what we're trying to promote as well.
And yeah, it's extremely insightful, because you're able to help dairy farmers in a way that really provides financial benefit to them. Did you been able to quantify that impact? Like, do you have any example of customers where you say, well, we're able to increase bottom line or top line by X%, or has it been more anecdotal at this point?
So it's largely anecdotal, but we estimate it's around $1,000 per cow per year for a dairy farmer, and so that it's quite significant benefits.
Okay, yeah. Then it almost becomes like, I don't know if you show a PowerPoint slide when you're presenting to a dairy farmer, but it's like that's almost like the slide, right? Like we cost X and the benefit is Y. It's $1,000 per cow per year, which is great.
Yeah, dairy farmers it's been so interesting, because I've never had to walk a dairy farmer through the ROI that much. Like they know, right? They want to know that I find a lot of farmers are like, wait a minute, like you can do this? Why? Right? And so they'll make you sell to them, but they absolutely understand the return on investment for them, the benefit that this can provide their herd. It's really interesting because some of them, we've had cases where a farmer will call us and say, I just found out about this. I need you to install this. Like last month, this happened, or last year this happened, and I really want to make sure it doesn't happen again. And so, you hear the challenges on their farm, you hear the struggles that they're going through, and they'll tell you directly, why they want this and how they think it can help. And that has been just incredible. A farm is, I say it's a business, and there's definitely a business side of it, but most farms are run by families, right? It's a dad and a mom, and it's their kids feeding calves, and it is the entire, the family unit working together to take care of these animals and to make our food. And when you work with farmers, you get to hear these stories. So you hear about, especially on these multi-generational farms, they'll tell you stories of their grandparents or their parents living through some really tough times, whether it be a disease that made their way through the herd, or maybe low milk prices, or whatever it is. And then you hear about the challenges that they're dealing with today, and how that impacts not only them, not only a farmer in their work, but also their daughter and their son, who are, sometimes these are teens, that they're trying to do their math homework, but having to come and help out with these problems. And it is such an incredible community of people for that. And you really get this connectedness to farmers, to their families, and to their herds that I would not have imagined, that I don't believe happens in other industries, that I'm just so thankful for. So yeah, it's been great. Return on investment for farmers is sort of an easy equation for them. It's an easy sell, and something they've been just incredibly helpful in helping us understand.
Yeah, no, I agree, Bethany. Your passion really comes out when it comes to your industry. And talk a little bit about your industry in terms of the agricultural sector. Do you feel that there are any impediments when it comes to promoting more technological innovation? Because it feels like we're still very much in the early days of what we can do, particularly with software and technologies. Like you mentioned, there's already a lot of technology that's within, let's say, a different agricultural settings, but not necessarily software driven. So curious to get your take on what you see in that space.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, there's certainly challenges. Agriculture is not always seen. Farmers are not always seen as the most sort of innovation forward folks, and you will have people in any industry that are not early adopters. So we've definitely, put care, taken time into finding out who the early adopters are in a given region, and really focused on those people first. I think that's important in any startup, but I think that's especially important in agriculture. Another big challenge that we find, and it's a little bit of a funny thing, but we're taking dairy farming, which has existed for 10,000 years, and we're applying really cutting edge things. When you talk about artificial intelligence and deep learning and light scattering to a dairy farmer, these are not things they know. They're not things that already, exist on farm. And so, but they are curious, which is also really fun. So, but we end up explaining some pretty incredible technologies and some really cutting edge stuff to some farmers. And, I think you need to find the people that are patient enough to take the time to understand that. But certainly on the investment side, when you talk about, and I sort of mentioned this, we're talking about something that people don't typically think about, or something that we take for granted, I think, a little bit. And then, this really cutting edge stuff, and getting buy-in there, getting folks to understand what you're doing is, it's not intuitive for most of us, right? A lot of investors have never stepped foot on a dairy farm. And so, getting that understanding. But at the same time, in the industry, for dairy farming, there's no doubt that, there's a lot of sensor technologies out there, which is also really fun. There's so many other startups that are not necessarily doing what Soma Detect is doing, but that are bringing more data to farm. And it's great to be part of that community. But yeah, you sort of need to find how you fit in, how you don't, we don't want to inundate farmers with data. We don't want to just be a gadget either. We really want to be something that brings incredible value to them, their families, and their operations. And so taking the time and really the care to figure out what that is, I think, is so critical for us and so important in this industry.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more, Bethany. It seems like you guys are really on the right path to helping solve an important problem. And so best wishes moving forward. I guess maybe one last question for you, Bethany, would be is where can people find out more about yourself or Soma Detect and the work that you guys are doing?
That's great. Yeah. So the best thing is to check out our website. It's www.somadetect, SOMADETECT.com.
Okay, very cool. And I'll link to it in the show notes. Bethany, I just want to say a quick thank you. And if you're ever in Montreal, I'll definitely find a chance to catch up in person.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Point of No Return podcast. Never miss an episode by clicking on the subscribe button on iTunes or Google Play.